Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Askari, and today we have back with us my friend, Mr. Jayant Bhandari. How are you?
I'm very well, Payman. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. We have a unique episode this time. You're hijacking my show, aren't you?
I am Payman, and the background is that I wanted to discuss with you something about Iran, and I want to get a balanced understanding of Iran. And Iran is something that is very uh, people have very different opinions of about Iran. When I was growing up in India, all history was about dates and the battles and the kings and the queens. There was virtually no explanation given to us about the culture and the people of those of the country. So we grew up thinking that kings and queens were the only people who mattered in any society. I see something very similar continuing in the media as well today. So, today when people think about understanding Iran, they think in terms of what Iran under Shah or in Iran under Khomeini, as if the leaders, the elite people in power are the only thing that matter in these societies. Now, I don't want to put my words into your mouth, but uh, I don't agree with that. I think they are more of a symptom of the society rather than the people who are taking the society in a direction that they want to take the society to. Um, so, you know, uh, there's one side of Iran is that the Persians I meet in the Western society, virtually all of them, and in fact, uh, yeah, virtually all of them I have ever met have a narrative that all faults lie with the ruling elite of Iran. Whatever Iran is suffering from is because Iranian rulers are responsible for that. And I think it was something very similar during Shah when the communists and the pro Islamic people uh, uh, got together to go against Shah when they thought that the only reason for any problem to do with Iran was the Shah. So I want to understand from you what you think is the balanced understanding of Iran. Is this just the elite who are responsible for whatever is happening in Iran, or is there something else behind it?
So before I answer that, I should make an admission. I was 4 when I left Iran, and I grew up with an Iranian culture, and I met with my family, and I understand the language. So I do have the culture, but I'm not I'm very aware that I didn't suffer the same way as the people that stayed. So I'm not trying to pretend like I had a bad life growing up. I didn't fight in the war in Iran-Iraq war. So I'm just making that admission. Um, w- I can answer it in a couple different ways. I've talked to a lot of people in the Middle East. You sit down and you talk to them, and they start trashing their culture. So they say, like, let's take Iran. Iran is the worst culture. We're the worst people. We're backwards. We don't know anything. Iran is the worst country in the world. And then when I, a Canadian, criticize them, I say, yeah, you're right. It's a terrible country. They switch around. They do a 180. Like, no, no, best country ever, best food, best pistachios. Um, and I never figured it out for a while. I thought they were like hypocritical. Like they say one thing and then they say another. But what they're really saying is, Payman, um, why they think that I'm saying that Canada is a better country than Iran. And I realized this in December of 2020 when I was working in the Middle East. I came back and I looked at Canada and I'm like, holy crap, Canada is no different than the Middle East. It's just as corrupt. It's just as chaotic. Our institutions are failing. Um, so I don't know if that directly answers your question, but you're right. Like there is a sense that they blame everything on their rulers. Uh, my personal opinion is it might have something to do with the fact that power is so centralized. We're starting to see it in the West as well as the government's just getting bigger and bigger. It doesn't matter that well, power is centralized in Canada and Justin Trudeau, but in America where it's distributed, it still doesn't matter. Like everybody blames the government. But in Iran, I'll tell you a funny slash tragic story. Um, my father had a brother, and something happened. These junkies, they got into a fight with him, and they stabbed him, and they murdered him. So they captured the guy that murdered my uncle, and they sentenced him to death. A few months before that, there was an attempted assassination on the life of the Shah, and one of the bodyguards threw himself in the way of the bullets. The bodyguard died, but the Shah survived. So the family of the gentleman that killed my uncle, they had an idea, they had money. They said, why don't we go to the family of the bodyguard that sacrificed his life, give them some money, and convince them to go to the Shah and commute our son's sentence from death to life. And they did, and the Shah did. And just through that one act, every single person in my dad's village turned on the Shah. Now, if this was a court and the court came to that decision, maybe it would have been a different outcome. But because power was centralized, every single mistake that the Shah made, it rested on his shoulders, and he became this like lightning rod for hatred.
Right. Okay. So, so I'm still thinking about the same thing, that why is it, what is it about the culture that they want to blame the elite for everything? Why don't they accept more self responsibility? Um, and why don't they blame something about their own culture, the religion, the way they live, the way of thinking, something about themselves? Why do they always blame someone else? Now, one thing good about Iranians, Persians, is that they at least don't, the Persians that I have met in North America, don't blame the US or Canada for what's happening in Iran, unlike so many other people who blame the West for all their problems. So at least they don't do that much, but still they don't accept self responsibility. When there is something going bad in Iran, the protests, when they happen outside the arts museum in Vancouver, they all go against the current ruling regime in Iran. When My thinking is that when, let's say, the headscarf is enforced in Iran, it is very likely. What do you think where that enforcement comes from? Is it coming just from the ruling elite, or there is the culture, the society also behind it? The individuals in the society also want to enforce it.
Can I go back in history and start from there?
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
So I'm not that I'm an expert in Iranian history, but Iran was I don't know, like an agricultural society. I don't want to say backwards, but that's pretty much what it was. And then there was the father of the previous Shah. He came in, he was a military guy, and he did what Ataturk did. He sort of industrialized. And then when the Shah was put in power in, I think it was 54 by the CIA after no, it was after, it was in World War II. So the Allies came in, they threw out the old Shah, they put in the new one, and he set about modernizing the country. And modernizing means removing the headscarves, and allowing alcohol, things like that. So he irked the religious space, and I've seen this in a couple of other Middle Eastern countries that are trying to modernize too quickly, and you irritate the base, and they kind of go in the other direction. So I think what happened is when in '79 the Shah lost power, they brought Khomeini back. He wrangled that base. He whipped up that base. So now you have like two different power centers in Iran. I think it was the ones that have backed themselves into a corner because for the past, I don't know how many years, since '79, 40, 50 years, they've been repressing the people. So if the people get the power, they're just going to execute these guys. And then on the other hand, you have the other people that I guess they would have been centrist. Now they've probably been radicalized to go the other way, and they want freedom. That's my perception of it. So this headscarf thing, I think what's happening, the people are saying is, guys, like this isn't working. I think they're saying to the Muslim clergy, Maybe you had good intentions in 79, but by like 81, 82, we realized this wasn't working. But now they've centralized a lot of power. So what you hear, the IRGC, Islamic Republican Guard Corps, that it's my understanding they control the Air Force as well. But basically that is the military, and they're using the military to prop up the government. So in answering your question, why are they blaming the government? The, in a lot of ways, at the end of the day, everything is your fault. But Iran is a little bit different here because I'll give you an example. When there's a protest and if it goes too far, like you remember the Ottawa convoy, the freedom convoy in Ottawa, it went too far. They beat people up with batons and they push them up and push them back. In Iran, they stand on top of the roofs and they spray the crowd with machine gun bullets, and they can get away with that because the people have been disarmed. So I'm not completely disagreeing with you, but there's more of a power imbalance in Iran, and that's why they blame the government.
Right. So, Payman, this just digressing a bit. I read that story about this Saudi Arabian teenager who dodged a flight back to Saudi Arabia a few years back from Thailand. I don't know if you remember that story, but if you don't, let me just very briefly tell you that story. This teenage girl was flying with her parents via Bangkok, and she uh, went to the police there and said, "Hey, I don't want to go to Saudi Arabia. They will kill me if I go to Saudi Arabia." Um, the parents insisted on taking her to Saudi Arabia, but Canadian government came in the scene, and basically she was offered asylum in Canada, and she moved to Canada. So this is, I thought it was a very brave move by this girl that she took the risk of going against her parents and found a very strategic way to get out of Saudi Arabia. Now, she ended up in Canada, and I recently found out that she now makes money from OnlyFans. Those people who don't know OnlyFans, it's a sort of porn website, from what I understand. She also has a child now, and she's unmarried. So I can fully understand that when you want to enforce too much of social freedom on people who might not be prepared to accept that freedom, things can go completely the wrong way. Now, of course, I'm assuming that some people accept that having a child outside wedlock and presenting yourself on a pornography website is the wrong way of living. So, assuming that to be correct, then she has gone to the completely other side of the situation, which, in my view, would be worse than where she started from. And I have seen the same thing, Payman, in India. As social conservativeness has decreased, promiscuity has increased rapidly, drunkenness has increased rapidly, drug addiction has increased rapidly. The whole social fabric has fallen apart. And family, men and women cheat on each other op- sort of openly. They feel proud of doing those kind of things. So I am in agreement in a way with those people who want to socially liberate a society slowly, that you have to create inner boundaries before you can remove the outer boundaries. Otherwise, the whole social fabric falls apart. People become savage and barbaric. And that is what I see happening in India. And that is what I tell my friends, that if I had a switch to end Islamic ruling system in the Middle East or in Afghanistan or in Iran, I would not use that switch, because the outcome, getting rid of one bad thing is maybe not enough. If at all it's a bad thing. The problem is that I have to understand the consequences, and what might come out of that might be worse than what we have today. So I would not want to even change the Taliban system in Afghanistan. In fact, sometimes I think that Taliban system would be an improvement for a lot of countries in those backward parts of the world. So that's where I come from. So I again completely agree with you that those people who opposed excessive social liberalization might have gone too far. Um, let's talk about something else. There are a couple of photographs of Iran that are shown ad nauseum on social media, and they tend to be exactly the same photographs. These are a bunch of girls wearing mini skirts in a university in Tehran or somewhere in Iran, and they are used as props for what Iran was like under the Shah. And then in juxtaposition, they show photographs of women now in full black garb, as if the switch from Shah to the Islamic rulers brought in a complete change of lives of women. Now, my first question is: Were is that portrayal of women in universities in Iran of 1960s or 70s uh, the correct portrayal? Because these are exactly the same two or three photographs I see non-stop about Iran on every social media, where they want to juxtapose the current burqa wearing women with the mini skirt wearing women of 60s and 70s.
I'd say I've seen the pictures too. I know what you're talking about. They do it with Afghanistan as well under the Soviets. It's misleading. So, yes, the Shah came in and liberalized the country and said women can. And I think the way he did it is he got his wife to dress in a more Western manner. So you send a signal to the women in society to follow. But I've talked to some Canadians that were in Iran in the 70s, and I asked them specifically, like, at the time, when you got to Iran, did it feel like it was exactly like the West? And they said no. It was still very much Middle East, and they were more conservative. Now, mind you, these pictures are taken in the cities. When you go out of the cities to the farming areas, the rural areas, women probably would have still covered their themselves. And it doesn't have to be a religious thing. Like, I think it's a cultural thing. Like my mom's mother, I believe, she lost most of her hair, so she would cover her head. And I think a lot of older women do that. It's just now that we have like Pantene Pro V and everything, everything looks fine. You can get away with it. The other thing I wanted to say, historically, Iran was never Muslim. They had their own culture and their own religion, and then we got conquered by the Muslims. And we're kind of stuck in this halfway point. So we're technically Muslim, but we're not practicing like the Saudis. Our language is not Arabic, it's Farsi. Our national holiday, New Year's, is a pagan one. Um, every Iranian I know is an alcoholic. Like, they just want to make kebab and have vodka or tequila. So it's not the same culture. That's also another aspect of it.
Right. Yeah. This is very interesting. I once met an Iranian, a Persian woman in at a conference, and we kept on talking all night about what was happening, how she escaped Iran. And this was a very interesting story. This girl wanted to get out of it, and she started smuggling alcohol between Iraq and Iran. So she used to go with other men, Iranian and Iraqi men, to the border to smuggle alcohol in and out of Iraq. And she told me that the only way she could get out of Iran was to get married with someone. So she got into a deal with some guy. Uh, they got married because the only way she could get out was to get permission of her husband. So she got married, took permission of her husband, left the country, and she had been in prison several times in Iran. Her mom and parents were also in prison at different times. And they all were lashed in the prison. And she told me something very similar to what you just said. That when I asked her about these miniskirt wearing women in photographs, which I used as props to how open-minded Iran was in the 60s and 70s, she said exactly what you just told me, which is that those photographs are the fringe aspects of the society. What used to happen in uh, a minuscule part of the universities did not does not reflect what used to happen elsewhere in the country. Um, I go a bit further than that. I don't necessarily think that wearing mini skirt is a sign of freedom. I think it's more of a sign of hedonism than of freedom. Now, these are two different concepts. Whether you agree with them or which side you prefer is different. But um, mini skirt conflating wearing mini skirt with uh, women empowerment or with freedom is, in my view, a wrong connection. So again, at least as far as the those photographs are concerned, I completely agree with you. Tell me, what would have happened had Shah continued to rule the country? Now, of course, this is a counterfactual question. You don't know what would have happened. Would or put it another way, would a change of regime in Iran put it on a path to where the West went? Would it open up? Would it become more uh, westernized, if I may use that word?
I'd put it this way. I think it would be a lot easier. So if you look at Iran, let's say 79, and you compare it to the neighboring countries. So you had Iraq. I don't know what would have happened to it if America hadn't blasted it into oblivion. Lebanon was pretty good until Israel destroyed it. Afghanistan, it's my understanding, was always bad. Pakistan, always unstable. But if you look at the Gulf states, or if you look at Saudi Arabia, I think in 79, it was much more difficult for them to become westernized than Iran. And like something about Iran, it had a more educated public, like more people had degrees. Um, the culture, I feel like it was less, I don't want to say like savage, less violent. Like there was more of like they would observe the rule of law. Um, and I look at something about that period of the Shah westernized the Iranians. So a lot of people started going into business and commerce. They started wearing suits and ties. They started visiting Europe more. So it did civilize them. I don't want to say the Shah was completely bad. It's just he did it too quickly, and he ended up technically, if you really want to lay blame, it was the Shah. He just did it too quickly, and he destroyed the country.
Right. Okay. But Ataturk did the same thing in Turkey. He did things too quickly, and he made Turkey, in many ways, a much better place. Although Turkey might be reverting back to its social conservativeness, I'm not even sure if that reversion is bad thing. But Ataturk did manage to open up the country rapidly and let it survive as a socially relatively liberal country for many decades. Isn't that true?
I mean, I'd agree with that. So, from my limited understanding, let's compare Ataturk to the Shah. I don't think the Shah ever used the military against the people the same way Ataturk did. I think Ataturk, from my again limited understanding, he looked at his country and he's like, it's in big terrible condition. We don't have a 300 years to go through a renaissance or whatever. So I'm going to bring in the military and we're going to put it in their charter that if the country starts going off the rails, the military has to come in and replace the leadership. And that kind of worked for a while in a way that it didn't work for the Shah because he didn't have that. But if you remember that failed coup attempt against Erdogan, people kind of started asking. They're like, "Oh, well, what did that solve? Like Ataturk did all of this, but in the end, we it didn't really. It just postponed the inevitable." So, I mean, I think Ataturk tried his best, but it doesn't seem to have stopped it.
Although, Payman, I have to say that I have friends in Turkey, and they tell me that Turkey is actually a better place. Uh, is continues to improve. The traffic has improved substantially in Turkey. People are behaving better uh, over the last couple of decades. So yes, inflation has been high, and Islamic um, fanaticism, according to the Western media, might have increased, but overall, my friends tell me, who the people who live in the West, they are thinking of, some of them I think have returned back to Turkey because they think Turkey has actually become a better country. But again, the problem, Payment, and this is what I see all the time, is that the Western media, or any media, not just Western media, portrays one side of the reality of any society. They want to ignore the other side of the reality. um, Turkey, I have been to Turkey many, many times, and I really enjoy going to Turkey. Um, and I think that uh, I would not disagree with my friends who say that Turkey actually has improved over the last few years. So again, I'm never sure about where the balance is, whether imposing social restrictions on society is a better thing or not. I tend to incline towards having some social opprobrium, some social restrictions, whether it comes from religion or whether it comes from the government. Um, I'm not necessarily all that clear. Um, the fact remains that the United States was, until 60s and 70s, there was social opprobrium about, uh, to and to do with drinking, or to do with being single mothers. And suddenly in the 60s and 70s, everything has started to change. And what I see as a result of that is a fragmentation of society, where society has become um, uh, everything goes, as long as there's um, uh, no uh, victim of crime, then that is not a crime. And I fully agree that, if you do drugs or if you do prostitution, it's your issue. It's not a social issue. It's not an issue for other people. But I still think that there's a social issue to do with that, because it breaks the society apart eventually. Um, from that perspective, I think that uh, uh, sometimes I think that the US should not have gone the way it did from 60s and 70s onwards. What do you think about it?
So I wasn't alive in the '60s, but I am aware of what happened. This whole Lyndon Johnson Great Society, take the kids out of the home, or get the father out of the home. Like I'm familiar with that. But because again, I wasn't born then, let me answer it in this way. I want to go back to Iran. You were talking about hedonism before, and miniskirts. I've been to Iran once. I've been back once. I think it was in 2014. And like you don't have that same concept of community or family anymore. So you take all the young adults, the young men and women, they're all packed into this mega city called Tehran. It's like 10 million people. When you put 10 million people there, there's all sorts of opportunities for making money. It's not like Canada where you have like 3 grocery stores and 3 cell phone providers. Somebody can open up a corner store and they can live off that. All people care about is having fun. So they're meeting, men and women, they're meeting each other. They're doing it in a way that the morality police can't get them. They do it in the car, get the girl's number. So there is a lot of extramarital sex. There's a lot of drinking, like the alcohol as well. I think it's because the government's putting them under so much pressure. And although I didn't see this, I've heard that there's a lot of drug use. And you were mentioning the decay and the savagery in India. It's the same thing in Iran. Like people are desperate, the ones that can't make money. So it's not uncommon for somebody to go to a doctor and be like, You botched the surgery on my wife 10 years ago. Give me $100,000 or I'll stab you in the parking lot. Or they'll just come stab people and steal their money and stuff. So what I'm trying to say is I agree, and the sort of social cohesion is falling apart. But I view it as you've destroyed the family and you've packed too many people too close to each other. I think that's
Right.
where that hedonism comes from. But that's just my theory.
Right. So do you again? Uh, do you think that a bit of Islamic enforcement on the society would have been a better thing to keep the society together? Now, I have no love for Islam payment, but I still think that every society requires its own religion and its own culture to keep itself together. You try to impose my Western values on those people and you worsen their situation. And this is what I think, in my view, happened with the Saudi Arabian teenager I talked about just a bit back. I if I were when she dodged that plane from in Bangkok, I thought that was a wonderful thing to do because that's what got her liberty. But she ended up, in my view, misusing that liberty into something completely perverse. So, using that as an example, and despite the fact that I have no love for Islam, my question is, do you think a bit of Islamic enforcement would have been a good thing? Is that actually a good thing in Iran? Because if you completely remove that enforcement, then the situation might just go the way India has gone, which is really, uh, you know, uh, perversion has degradation and perversion has really caught on in India. The society is falling apart. The families have fallen apart. They were fake families anyway, but even that fakeness has fallen apart. Uh, so just uh, siding with the devil, if I may use that expression, isn't it a good thing in a way that some religious enforcement keeps that society together?
Let me answer that in a roundabout way, and then I'll come to the girl in Bangkok. Uh, when like Iran, they destroyed the economy, so the government went after the people, but so did the religion. So my parents' generation, the one that brought me over to Canada, they not only rejected their government, they rejected their God as well. And the only way they got through that is they kind of formed their own sort of mini religion. uh, 5, 10 families. They all get together. They all have kids. They all have dinner parties. The dinner parties, the kids are playing. The husbands are over here. They're respecting their wives. The wives are taking care of their husbands. So they were spiritual, but they weren't religious. But what I'm saying is that which you are referring to right here, some sort of moral code, my parents instilled, and their generation instilled on their children, and it kind of went a little bit beyond what the West would consider. Like, you were not allowed to get earrings if you were a guy. Tattoos were completely out. Like my sister, I remember she was never allowed to be out at night until I think university. So you had these things. It doesn't have to be Islamic, but it's good to have them. Sort of virtues, guardrails. Now, with Islam, it's really counterintuitive, but they came in and they said they tried to impose morality on the people, and it backfired. Like it just like, you can't have a morality police, I guess is what I'm saying, and they put the people under pressure, and now they're acting hedonistically and they're alcoholics. Now, bringing it back to this woman, this young girl that was in Bangkok, probably what happened is, like, she came over here and she had so much freedom and she didn't know what to do with it. And I got to admit, I've fallen victim to that. I mean, who I am now is not the same person I was in like the 1990s. Um, but like, definitely the Iranians that I see now are not the same ones. Like, because I had a very strong father figure, every Iranian kid did at that time. If you did anything, like, you would get spanked. So, but that's gone now, and people are just doing whatever they want.
Your parents were clearly intellectual elite, paymen, so they had a moral code they could pass on to you. But for the larger masses, they don't have a moral code, and they probably need an external fences to keep them under restraint. Um, uh, this is sometimes what I think, given the fact that I grew up in that society. And again, I'm on your side when you said you were not a saint at one point of time in your life. I was not a saint either. I have done some things which I now look down upon. So I'm not claiming a higher moral ground in any way whatsoever. I have just gone through the whole spectrum of experiences, and and now, given that I have experienced this whole spectrum, I am sometimes inclined to a stronger social opprobrium than there exists in the Western society. For example, in the Western society today, given that we have slowly sort of liberated everything, which means that you can pretty much do whatever you want to do. You can do drugs, you can do become single mothers, or you can you don't really have a career, or not really support yourself, and still feel proud about claiming that you are those kind of people. um, and then it has gone into a whole spectrum, crazy sexual aspect, where children are now exposed to drag shows, which in my view, should not be there. So I again, I'm defending Iran in a way, some of those countries in a way that if you cannot have inner moral code, and your parents clearly had an inner moral code, if you don't have an inner moral code, you probably require the society to provide those fences for you. So again, that was just my comment here. Coming back to the burqa thing, the enforcement of blacks, the scarf that the Western feminists or Western media talks about, how well is it actually enforced? Do women actually have to wear the scarf in Iran, or these are one-off cases in which which women get caught and they get into trouble?
I believe early on in 79, like they were very vicious at the beginning of the revolution. And if they caught women, they call them the morality police. If they caught them without their, like if their hair is showing, and they would punish them. Maybe they would whip them, but they just detain them for a while. As time went on, the people they realized, like, this. I think the Muslims realized that the revolution was a mistake. It wasn't working, and they're like, guys, we cannot force morality onto the people and hold on to power and money. So let's just let the people do whatever they want, and let's steal the country's wealth. And the more they stole the wealth, the more immoral people got. Um, I wanted to touch on some, if we could go back. Over the last few weeks, you and I have been talking, and I really got the sense that Iran might actually be very different from Afghanistan and even India. So, like Afghanistan, it's my understanding that there's almost no law. Like you say, there's the Taliban, and you need something like the Taliban to enforce order. Iran, it's like it's an agricultural society, and talking to my parents, with the exception of the Spanish flu, which caused a famine in Iran, there was never really that much civil unrest. Everybody got along. You had peace, order, good governance. Um, but from what I'm hearing from you, India is not quite like that. Like people can hurt other people and get away with it. That happens now in Iran because everything's been destroyed. People are desperate and they're just buying all the prosecutors off. But before, you seem to have order. So I feel like it's different.
Well, of course, these are very different countries. India is a true hellhole. Uh, if a woman gets raped, and if she goes to the police, she's more likely to be raped again by the police than get some justice. And even if she does not get raped at the police station, she will suffer for years to come. There was a recent case of a girl from my area, Madhya Pradesh. the central part of India. This girl was raped in 2019, and the government did not help her out. Her dad was killed by the rapist. Her uncle was killed by the rapist a few years back. Her brother was killed by the rapist uh, uh, last year, and the girl herself was killed a few weeks back. Um, Again, these things can carry on for years, and there's no justice system that comes to protect the victim, and the perpetuator uh, is just completely free to do whatever he wants to. So yes, I completely agree. There's no law and order situation in India, and it's erroneous to compare India with Iran. Um, and it's the same thing with when people compare India with China. I always tell them, hey, you're clueless about both the countries, because if you had some clues, you would not even start to compare the two countries. They are just two different planets. One is Mars and one is Venus. Let's talk about where you see Iran going into the future. Do you think it is justified in having a nuclear program? Is it justified in uh, uh, being anti-Israeli? And what lies for the future of Iran over the next 10, 15, 20 years?
So, as for the future of Iran, I'm surprised it's survived this long because when the people hate the government this badly and when the government mismanages the economy, it usually falls apart. But it goes back to the IRGC. Like apparently they've insulated the system in such a way, and they've just socialized everything. Like they run all the industry in the country, so they have all the money, and it's getting they're entrenched, and it's very difficult to get rid of them. So I don't know. I mean, I don't see anything good for Iran in the future where they overthrow them or there's moderates come in. And by the way, the supreme leader, the Ayatollah, I think his name is Khamenei now. He's no longer the sole authority like he was under the previous supreme leader. Now it's the IRGC. So that's like basically their deep state. That's one problem. As for the nuclear thing, I mean, to me, Iran is a hostile nation, at least hostile to the West. I don't personally want them to be nuclear armed. If we're talking about nuclear energy, under the Shah, the U.S. under Carter was trying to give nuclear energy to the Shah, but then they put that on hold after the revolution. Generally speaking, though, I think some people might not know this, but like the whole purpose of the non-nuclear proliferation, the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, was obviously to keep nukes out of the hands of other people. But like America was supposed to keep nukes out of the hands of the West, and the Soviets were supposed to keep nukes out of the hands of their bloc. But they both kind of cheated, and I don't know the order, but like Soviet Union gave nukes to China and North Korea, maybe Pakistan. America gave nukes to Israel, for example. France has them. I think UK has them. So, like, if we go down this road, we might have a world where everybody has a nuclear weapon, and maybe you could argue that's a good thing. But that's just I don't want Iran to have nukes. It's my personal opinion.
Okay, Payman, I visited Africa for the first time about I would say 15 or 20 years back, and I was once landing in Harare in Zimbabwe under the rule of Mugabe, and I was thinking, and I watched Blood Diamond and a couple of other really gruesome movies on the plane to Harare. And when I landed, I just wanted to fly back from Harare. I thought I would meet men holding AK-47s, ready to kill anyone in the way. I thought I would face a very violent society. And I spent about a week in Harare, including with one of the nephews including a couple of days with one of the nephews of Robert Mugabe. I realized over that period of time that unlike what I thought before I arrived in Harare, which was that I thought people were very violent, what I realized that people were very sheepish in Harare. Zimbabweans just accept everything. They accept any victimization. They don't fight back. They are very passive, and this is what I've seen. Then I saw this increasingly in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, in Ethiopia, in Ghana, in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa that I went to. So contrary to the perception I had received from Hotel Rwanda or from Blood Diamond, I realized that sub-Saharan Africans were very sheepish, passive people. And I have never been to Afghanistan or Iran, payment, but I continue to think that while Taliban seems to be these very aggressive, macho, violent people, most of the society must be very passive. And the reason I think that way is because the only reason such a strong men rise to positions of power is because there's no warrior mentality within the society where people don't fight for their rights. Um, so while I have never been to either Iran or Afghanistan, my temptation is to believe that the larger society must be very passive, must be unaware of its right, and gives in very quickly. This is also something I've seen in India as well. So my question is, are people in Iran relatively passive? Why don't they get together and fight against the regime if the regime is seen as bad regime for those people?
So the way I answer that is I look at what country has like property rights, or they yearn for property rights. In this case, property, I'm talking about land specifically. So Iranians, they're old school, and they they love land. Like they love that's basically their nest egg. So in some ways, they do want freedom, and they do understand that. In other ways, they don't understand it. Like they just don't understand the concept of the Second Amendment, like the right to bear arms, sovereignty. Um, and where I'm going with that is it's I think it's a principle Thomas Sowell always says, like when the government is big, the people are small. So I look at, we talked about Turkey earlier. I used to go to the Turkey like every year in the 90s, 1990, 1991, 92. It was very chaotic in the early 90s. It was very dirty. Um, People were very aggressive. Like it was very common. You go to the bazaar and you see a couple of fist fights. Fast forward to today, you don't see that. They're more, civilized. But what's happened is they're just being governed by more and more rules, more and more laws. The government's gotten bigger, the people have gotten smaller. That's just my general view. As to why Iranians don't rise up, I think like the level of brutality in Iran is it's just above and beyond. Like I can't even say who, they'll probably just throw them in jail. But I talked to some friends in Iran, and they tell me, like, if past a certain point, let's say you have 100,000 students protesting in the streets, all they have to do is they come round up 1,000 of the students, they execute 100, 200, 300 of them. Maybe they hurt the women in captivity, or as I said, they fire spray bullets onto the crowd. It's like it's just next level brutality, and I keep, this is what drives me insane. Like I'm telling all the Iranian people, I'm like, there is your argument in support of the Second Amendment, but they can't make that connection. So ultimately, they don't have weapons, and the government has all the weapons. That's the problem.
Okay. Is the United States correct in applying sanctions on Iran? Do you think the US should try to influence Iran, or they should let it go the way it's going, let it go its own way?
It's a tough question. Like I think after what happened with Russia and Biden put sanctions on Russia, something clicked in me, and I realized that it's basically an act of war. Like putting sanctions on a country is kind of like blowing up a factory in that country. And I think there's always a justification for a war. I'm not going to say that there's never a case for war. So if the West thinks that um, we have to commit this crime of aggression against Iran, the sanctions, I'm all on board. Um, but everything's been so muddied, Jayant. Like I don't even know. I can't even remember what these sanctions were for. I think Clinton put them on. Probably it's for the fact that they're involved in state-sponsored terrorism. But this is a conversation I have with Iranians all the time. I say, Iran's a fringe nation. They're supporting terrorism, and then they fire back. They're like, "Well, yeah, but do you really think the CIA is not doing it as well?" And I'm like, "Well, I guess so." I don't know. It's all is fair in love and war, I guess.
Right. Okay. Great. Thanks very much, Payman. Anything about Iran that I think I should have asked you but did not, and some extra color you want to give in closing?
Uh, Iran's got like a. I'm looking at the West, which is Rome, Iran, old Persian Empire, and China. Like these are three really old nations, and you kind of see it. Like they're more stable than some of the younger nations. Obviously, they're all different. They have their own problems, but the ones that like Africa, which maybe my history is not that good, but they didn't really have that, 1,000 years of governance. They don't have that same stability. So these things, it really helps. Like it builds up over time, and it's iterative, and I think that's one of the benefits for Iran. The drawbacks for Iran that we didn't touch on is it there's so many ethnicities in Iran that it's a miracle that country has managed to stay together. Like you have Fars, you have Turks, Baluch, you have the Baha'is, you have Arabs, Afghanis. We have, believe it or not, we have Black Iranians. I'm sure I'm missing a whole bunch. Shomali, Rashdi, like I don't know how that country survived.
Right. Great, Payman. Thanks very much for your time, and I feel more knowledgeable about Iran as a result of that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jayant. Can I have my show back?
You get it back.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thanks for the interview. And I hope you're having a good time where you are.
Thank you.